1 p.m. Central Time. Okay, let me pull up my script. Welcome to Changing Roles, Impacting Student Achievement Through Faculty Development, brought to you by the ACRL University Library Section's Professional Development Committee. We're so delighted to have you and our presenters here today. I am Sam Harlow, she, hers, and I am co-chair of this committee. I will be moderating this program along with my colleague, Amber Wessies, my fellow committee member. This is one of our ongoing series of online programs sponsored by our committee. The chat is on the screen. The presentation link is on the screen, and we'll share it throughout this introduction as well. Here is a link to our upcoming professional development webinars as well. So before I introduce our presenters, a few logistics. This session is being recorded and we will send a link of the video, slides, and any other supplemental documentation to everyone who registered for the program. You can access the slides during the session if you wish at the link in the chat. If you want to download it, you can go to File, Download to your computer as well. The total program will run for an hour, including time for questions. Please feel free to add questions to the chat box throughout the presentation at any time. Amber will be collating them and will be prepared to read them to today's presenters. As you use the chat feature, please remember to make sure you send your messages to all panelists and attendees, or everyone, now says everyone, so that we can see what you're asking and others can see, so that we try not to repeat questions. We will post a link to a brief evaluation in the chat box after the Q&A session. Please take a few moments to give us your feedback on today's program. So with those announcements out of the way, I am very happy to start today's program with a brief introduction of our presenters, and then they can more fully introduce themselves as they see fit. Jane Hammonds is an assistant professor and the teaching and learning engagement librarian at the Ohio State University Libraries. Her work centers on providing instructor development to support the integration of information literacy into the curriculum, and her research explores the potential for librarians to impact teaching and learning through faculty development. Amanda Folk is associate professor and head of the teaching and learning department at the Ohio State University Libraries. Her scholarly interests include exploring the sociocultural nature of information literacy and implications for teaching and learning, as well as examining the academic and library experiences of student populations that have traditionally been marginalized in higher education in the United States. Michael Flierl is an associate professor and the student learning librarian at the Ohio State University Libraries. His scholarship investigates the intersections of information literacy and student learning and success through qualitative and quantitative methods. And without further delay, I will hand this over to our panelists. I will remain muted and with my camera off during this session, but definitely please ask questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Welcome everyone again to our presentation. We are so excited to have so many people here today for our presentation, Changing Roles, Impacting Student Achievement Through Faculty Development. Before we jump into the content, we did want to take to check and see how everyone is doing today. So if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat how you're feeling today, we've given you some options on the screen, everything from engaged ermine to quizzical quokka to irritated ibis. You can feel free to choose one of these and share your response in the chat. You can pick something else as well if none of these match how you're feeling today. And of course, you are not required to share if you would prefer not to. I'm seeing some hungry hippos out there, curious corgi like that one. Some sleepy folks out there. Oh no, lots of sleepy sea otters. We're gonna have to make sure to wake these people up. Hungry hippos, calm cuttlefishes, that's good. Quizzical quokka, irritated ibis, frazzled ferret, all of the above. Oh, the opposite of a calm cuttlefish. Overwhelmed otter, oh no, sorry about that. Engaged ermine, yeah, sleepy otter. So it seems like we've got a lot of sleepy folks out there, a lot of overwhelmed folks out there, overwhelmed orangutan. So hopefully today won't be too overwhelming for all of those folks that are feeling a little overwhelmed today. But thank you all so much for sharing how you're feeling today. We always just like to take a few minutes just to check in and acknowledge. We know lots of folks have you're all very busy. You have a lot of things going on. So we're really happy that you chose to spend the time with us today. Just want to mention again, we hope that folks are interested and willing to engage and participate, but we completely understand if you are in the position where you would just rather sit and listen, that is perfectly fine as well. So we will, from that, go ahead and jump into our content a bit more. So we just wanted to briefly introduce ourselves again, just so we can give a little bit of background on how we sort of the engagement that we've been having with faculty development, so you can have an idea of where we are coming from. So as you heard, my name is Jane Hammonds. I'm an assistant professor in the University Libraries at Ohio State. And my engagement with faculty development goes back several years. Sort of the first major faculty development project that I worked on was designing a 3-day faculty information literacy summer institute. So I designed the whole curriculum for that. Faculty came in for 3 days. We talked about what information literacy is. We talked about why it's important. We talked about how to integrate information literacy into their classes. We talked about how to advocate for information literacy with their colleagues. So that was my first big engagement with faculty development. That was at my previous institution. Since coming to Ohio State, my work primarily centers around faculty development, specifically around integrating information literacy into the curriculum. So for example, I designed and facilitate a online course called Teaching Information Literacy. It's a 6-module Canvas course that instructors can complete to learn more about information literacy. If they do complete that, they can earn a teaching endorsement or a credential from our Drake Institute for Teaching and Learning at Ohio State. I design and lead multiple workshops every year for instructors around information literacy related topics. So teaching scholarship as conversation, teaching source evaluation, lots of other similar related topics. I'm also a senior affiliate for the Drake Institute for Teaching and Learning. And in that role, I engage with pedagogy a little bit more broadly. So for example, I'm currently leading a book discussion group around the book Small Teaching Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning by James Lang. So I try to engage in faculty development in a lot of different ways. A lot of it centers around information literacy, but not all of it. So I'll pause there and I'll pass it over to Amanda and let her share a little bit.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jane. My experience with faculty development really started when I joined Ohio State about 6 years ago. The Teaching and Learning Department had an active partnership with our Writing Across the Curriculum coordinator, Dr. Chris Mannion, and he was eager to work with me and I was eager to work with him. And he really introduced me to the faculty development world and included me in programming through the University Center for the Advancement of Teaching. Since then, I have developed a multi-module. It can be a multi-day in person or multi-week if it's virtual faculty development workshop called Meaningful Inquiry at Ohio State. And that is led by a team of facilitators that includes Jane and Dr. Chris Mannion, as well as our colleagues Hannah Primo and Katie Bloxage. And in that, we discuss equity gaps in higher education, talk about information literacy as a potential hidden curriculum for many students, and then introduce strategies for instructors to design their research assignments more transparently and hopefully more equitably. So those strategies include decoding the disciplines and transparency in teaching and learning, or TILT. Like Jane, I'm also a senior affiliate with our University Center for Teaching and Learning, and as head of the Teaching and Learning Department, I do a lot of coordination with other colleagues at the university who are also doing faculty development in different ways and about different topics. So I'll end there and pass the microphone to Michael.
Hi everyone, Michael Flierl again. So my experience with faculty development was in 5 years, give or take, working at Purdue University's Impact program. That's the Instruction Matters Purdue Academic Course Transformation, where over approximately on average 13 weeks, instructors would work on typically interdisciplinary teams with a librarian, educational technologist, and instructional designer, along with a couple other faculty. So we'd be on teams of 6 people, and the goal would be to redesign a specific course or sometimes set of courses over the 13 weeks to make them more student-centered, to use educationally educational technology more purposefully and intentionally, and also to embed information literacy into curricula. So my role ranged in that program over 5 years, ranging from working individually one-on-one with instructors saying, you talk about this learning outcome, but I don't believe you. I don't see it in the class, all the way up to leadership positions where I helped co-design curricula for the program. I served on the assessment team, and I taught the individual sessions in which we were trying to model the practices in which we were trying to help educators learn. So I think I'll end it to there, and I'll pass it back off to Jane.
Thank you, Michael. And apologies, I just realized it got really dark outside, so it got really dark in here. I don't normally have the lights on. I didn't expect it to get so dark outside, so sorry about that. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about how faculty development, especially in leadership roles for librarians, can really support librarians' ability to reach our goals related to student success. We'll talk a little bit about the competencies and the expertise that librarians have that support their ability to engage with faculty development. And we'll describe some of the steps that you might be able to take to either get started with faculty development or to expand your role in faculty development. So we'd like to hear a little bit from you. We do have a couple of interactive elements in the presentation today. So we'd like to hear from you what your experience is related to collaborating or leading a faculty development initiative. So we have a link to a Mentimeter poll. That link should be coming in the chat. You should also be able to use the QR code on the screen and go out to that poll. So if you have any trouble accessing that, please do let us know. And that's just the one question. We just want to hear about your experience with faculty development. So I'm going to try to go ahead and go out to that poll so we can actually see the results coming in. So hopefully everyone is seeing the results of the poll now. If you are not, please let me know. Good. Thank you, Amanda. And we'll give just a few more seconds for those folks that feel comfortable responding to share their responses. All right, so we'll give it just 10 more seconds. So as we see in our response here, it looks like most folks either have no experience or limited experience combined with those two categories there, which is great because that's what we're here really to talk about today, to get hopefully get some folks started in thinking about faculty development. But we also have a good chunk who have some experience or even some significant experience with faculty development as well. So we definitely love to hear, in the chat as we go through, if there are things that match or don't match your experience, we'd love to hear from you in the comments as we go forward. All right, so thank you all so much for sharing your responses there. Try to escape from that to go back to our presentation. So our second interactive element, we'd like to have a chance to hear from you about what you think faculty development is. So how you would define or describe faculty development. And the way we're planning to do this, you can see that we have 4 links to different documents. These should all be editable Word documents. So you should be able to go to the link that matches your last name and go in and you'll see the document and there'll be a position where you can add in your own definition of faculty development. So that those links should be in the chat as well. So if you have any problems accessing your document, please let us know. So we'll give everyone a chance to share their responses. So you should be able to add a bullet point and to share your response here for our question of what is your definition of faculty development? We know it's a little awkward always to try to add to a document when other folks are adding that. So we understand as things are moving around. Mm-hmm. I see lots of folks are still adding, so we'll give it just a couple more minutes to let folks share their responses there. So some of the responses that I'm seeing, pedagogy and classroom learning related workshops and training opportunities, sharing experiences, knowledge with others to serve greater needs on campus, workshops, courses, or one-shots to assist faculty in developing competencies and learning the tools of the trade, collaborative teamwork to increase pedagogical practices. So those are a few of the examples. Michael, Amanda, if you have any that you wanted to share, feel free to jump in.
Sure, we've got some great ones here. Chance for folks who teach to deepen and broaden their teaching to make it more effective. I like this really succinct one too, ongoing learning for faculty as teachers and researchers. An opportunity for staff members to further develop their skills and collaborate with other professionals to better support the learning objectives of an institution. And here's another one that I like the specificity here, opportunity for faculty to explore topics related not only to pedagogy in general, but also pedagogy, and this is emphasized for the current student population, not student of years ago.
I'll note just one here, Jane. Long-term investment in people who will be at your institution longer than students. I thought that's intriguing. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing your responses there. So you can see some of the themes coming in, like pedagogy related training, support, increasing faculty members' ability in a variety of different areas as teachers, as researchers, really investing in those folks that are going to be at the institution for a long time. And I love the one that Amanda shared about helping instructors think about teaching current students rather than, the way that things have always been taught in the past. So yeah, great. So we'll go ahead and go back. So thank you all so much for sharing your definitions of faculty development there. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael, who's going to talk a little bit more about how librarians can use faculty development to support their goals.
Okay, hi again, everyone. So this section, and sorry, I need to create a timer or else I will go all day. This section here is to show two specific things. One, what we found faculty development to be about, or different aspects of it to consider, and to communicate. I think we'd like to argue that there's something in it for everyone, that everyone can find their own avenue or level of engagement, given the available resources and time that they have available. And then two, like, how can it advance teaching and learning goals within libraries? So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So there's three different kind of dimensions here, or three different levels of engagement you can really kind of consider faculty development. So one would be at the far left end, individual teaching. So that could be working with an individual instructor, that could be working with a single course, that could be working with a curricula, that could even, so at the more individualized levels, that's working one-on-one, typically with an instructor, or a specific, perhaps an instructor overseeing multiple courses or multiple sections. But it's really to improve individual teaching. That is valid. That is a perfectly acceptable way to go about faculty development. And in fact, it might lead to higher levels of engagement or faculty development, or it might help you achieve higher ends as it relates to teaching and learning goals. The second one would be cultivating communities. So this would be more strategic, more programmatic. You're really this level would be really trying to facilitate the growth of educators, facilitate helping instructors become better. And not only that, but like kind of help you without help them without your direct engagement. So you get them interested in teaching and learning, kind of spark a fire, so to speak. And then ideally you get them interested such that they do their own investment, they do their own research, and they loop other people in. So rather than one instructor in a department, you get an entire department talking about how they can teach better, how they can more effectively and intentionally integrate information and data into their courses over a set number of different courses, as opposed to an individual class or an individual classroom session. So the goal here, I guess, for cultivating a community is for it to be more self-sustaining. So this is kind of the gardening level, so to speak, to where you have a garden that's self-sustaining, that provides its own seeds, that will propagate itself. And then lastly, and perhaps the most difficult and maybe the most rare, would be enabling institutional change. So this would be at the level of curriculum mapping. This would be for more administrative development. So working with administrators, provosts, associate deans, department chairs, that type of thing, to where you kind of, rather than just create this aura of or this community of teaching and learning, where kind of like the rubber, sorry, I got to move my camera here, where the rubber meets the road, to where perhaps promotion and tenure requirements change as a result of a greater focus on efficacy in teaching and learning. Or you can help student success metrics move, or an administrator might say, okay, let's try to improve, let's try to reduce the withdrawal or failure rate for a particularly difficult set of courses within our curriculum. How do we go about that in an intentional, programmatic, systematic way? So there's a lot of different, there's a range of options basically available for you. You might need to start at the improving individual teaching. It might just start off with working with an individual. And I've personally found from my experience, telling someone you can help them out, telling a faculty member or an instructor that you can help them out, that might be persuasive. But if a peer in their same department, or if they know someone and they could vouch for you saying, we worked with them, this worked out really well, or the teaching and learning department in the libraries is fantastic, you need to work with them, they really helped me out. That word of mouth in particular can really mean something. And something I think I failed to mention earlier, we say faculty development here, but really we mean this in a broad, inclusive sense. Anyone who's in front, basically anyone who's providing instructions. That could be teaching assistant, that could be an adjunct faculty. We mean this in an inclusive sense. So I think I'll just conclude this slide by saying that partnerships, collaboration and partnerships kind of increase as you go through this process, so to speak. And that could be particularly important. If you want to scale up, that's a really important angle of, you can only do so much individually, and work and finding ways for meaningful collaborations in which you can help move the needle for someone or help them achieve a specific desirable goal for them will help you kind of get at more sophisticated and more complex or more far-reaching faculty development efforts. But that's all to be said. There needs to be infrastructure and support and resources for that to happen. And it's very plausible to start at the individual level and then kind of work your way up, work with an individual that spreads to a department. And then who knows, then you're talking to a department chair about a summer program or something like that. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So I think it's fair to say that faculty development unto itself, just left to its own devices, isn't necessarily an inherently positive goal for libraries. Put differently, what does faculty development do for libraries? What does faculty development do for teaching and learning goals? That is a valid question. And I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it could accomplish a lot of goals in a really scalable way. I think that's a really important piece of this, is the scalability of faculty development. Put differently, librarians can only do so much instruction. And I'm sure I wouldn't be the first person to say this, but if you're just stuck in doing 51 shots, or if you're doing 75 different online and in-person instructional sessions, that's not super sustainable, and it's also not as scalable as faculty development. Faculty development, you're working with an instructor who could be teaching 5 different sections of 50 different students. So in a 1-hour session of working with a faculty, you can reach 5 different sections rather than 5 individual instances of classroom visits. So if part of your program wants to deal with information literacy, you can embed information literacy much more sustainably and at scale working through faculty development, right? So if you work in faculty development approach or angle, you can impact learning outcomes, you can impact assessments, you can impact learning activities rather than just being necessarily part of an learning activity or a single or even 2 sessions strung together. And then there could be outputs to this. So I've done some research in this with some really talented colleagues to where we would survey students or survey instructors. And we found some correlational, preliminary and correlational data, but still some evidence to suggest that how students use information can play a role in their student academic success and in how motivated they are to learn in a disciplinary environment. So that can have real world impacts. In my program, the impact program, we found that we can demonstrate with evidence that instructors and students who participated in our program were less significantly, in a statistically significant manner, less likely to earn a D, F, or W, a D or F, or withdraw from the class altogether. We helped students continue on their intended course of major, and we even accounted for grade inflation while we did that. And that really spoke to administrators. That gave the library's work a real impact to outside the libraries. If we can go forward a little bit, Jane, thank you. Another aspect to this is what I found personally, and I think you'll find some supportive in the literature, is the interdisciplinarity potential for faculty development. Faculty enjoy working with other faculty outside of their normal ways of seeing or outside of their regular kind of working, the way they work, outside of their departments, outside of the people they see day in, day out. And they find a particular value to that, and libraries is a really great neutral site, neutral arbiter, so to speak, to bring, it makes sense for libraries, anyone can come to a library, right? It makes sense for different disciplines working together. I had a business instructor and an electrical engineer, I think it was, yes, work together, and they found all these different ways in which they could synergize, ranging from someone's father being a Huey pilot to talk about the computer systems on this helicopter, all the way to how to write differently or different types of writing assignments for electrical engineering students, which, as you can imagine, don't love writing. So there's all these opportunities to not only just bring people together, but to create an interdisciplinary community and for the libraries to be the center of that. Again, that could be a larger, more strategic goal for your libraries that you can advance through the lens or like through a faculty development effort. And I think one more, Jane, thank you. And then lastly, we can kind of reconceptualize what academic librarianship is or what it should be or how we can perceive ourselves. So there's some really interesting research about how librarians perceive themselves through faculty development, more strongly as educators. So maybe some of the earlier research, even in 2000s before that, librarians were viewed purely the support role, offering up resources for faculty and then stepping back. Where really now librarians can, through faculty development and other teaching and learning initiatives, really kind of take the reins and be more active in the teaching and learning environments and initiatives on a campus, to where librarians can take the initiative and create a sustainable, scalable faculty development program that will have potentially wide-ranging implications across campus. So, and some of that depends on how we view ourselves. Do we view ourselves strongly as educators in our own right, or are we merely delegated to a role of purely support? I would argue the former and not the latter. So to kind of wrap up here quickly, sustainability and scalability is particularly important. And when you're considering faculty development efforts and teaching and learning efforts, faculty development is a great way to hit sustainability and scalability for information literacy and other goals. There's applicability to every institution here, large or small, and that we can hit on multiple aspects of the student and faculty experience. And with that, I think I will conclude and hand it off to Jane.
Thank you, Michael. So in this section, the two key questions that are going to be guiding this section is thinking about the factors that support librarians' ability to act as faculty developers, and thinking a little bit more, adding on to what Michael talked about how faculty development aligns with the traditional role and identity of librarians. So thinking about the first question of the factors that support librarians' ability to act as faculty developers, I think an interesting way to look at that is to think about what the competencies that faculty developers actually have. So what are the key aspects of the work that faculty developers do? So Clarence Mabey and Rachel Fundater did some research a couple of years back where they looked at competencies for faculty developers, and they found highlighted a couple of really key competencies that faculty developers need to be successful in their work. So faculty developers need to be collaborative. They need to be able to work with instructors from a lot of different disciplines to make transformations in that learning environment. Faculty developers need to be scholarly, so they need to be familiar with and know how to apply various theories of teaching and learning. Faculty developers need to be contextual, so they need to understand the context in which they are working, to be able to work across multiple disciplines, to be able to understand the broader institutional context that they're working in and how to navigate that institutional context. And they need to be reflective. So they need to know how to encourage the instructors that they're working with to be reflective and think critically about their teaching. They need to do that in their own teaching as well. It's also important to note that faculty developers are often described as being in kind of an in-between position. I've seen some comments in the chat about sort of faculty status. So an interesting thing to note about faculty developers are they come from a lot of different disciplines. There is no degree in faculty development. And so folks that work at faculty development come from a lot of different backgrounds. Some faculty developers have faculty status, some have administrator status, some have staff status. It really just kind of depends. So it's very similar to librarians in some ways, right? And so faculty developers are often seen as being kind of in this in-between position and having to especially be able to mediate, for example, between, speaking the language of the instructors that they're working with, but also speaking the language of the administration, kind of acting as the translator between those two groups. So as we think about those competencies of faculty developers, we wanted to give you a chance to reflect and think about which of those competencies that you feel that you already have, and any areas that you feel that you might need to improve. You don't have to share. If you would like to share in the chat, we would love to hear from folks thinking about these competencies, but we did just want to give everyone a chance just to reflect and think about those competencies like collaborative, contextual, scholarly, which of those competencies you might have and which areas you think that you might need to improve. So I'll pause for just a second to let folks respond, anyone who feels comfortable doing so.
Jane, could you go back a slide so that people can see those competencies for another moment?
There we go. Thank you, Michael. So in the interest of time, I will go ahead and move forward, but please feel free to continue adding comments in the chat if you would like. But as I look at this list of the key aspects of faculty developers' work, I see a lot of connection with the work that librarians are already doing, right? And so, as I was looking through, and thinking about this article and other work that I've seen on faculty developer competencies, I'm seeing a lot of connection and overlap with the work that librarians already do. So I'm going to go ahead and go forward a little bit. So, just wanted to highlight a couple. I saw someone in the chat had posted, right? Librarians constantly have to collaborate with faculty across multiple disciplines, right? We have to be prepared and work with faculty. One day we're working with a nursing instructor. The next day we're working with a chemistry instructor. The next day we're working with the English instructor, right? So we have to be familiar and able to productively and effectively collaborate with all of those different types of groups, right? We have to understand our institutional context well and what's going to work within our context. how we can engage with those different groups and know what's going on in those areas. So I saw, some of those comments coming in, collaborative, reflective, folks are answering in the chat as well. So those competencies that are highlighted ones that faculty developers have, a lot of those are competencies that librarians already have. In addition, thinking about that idea that faculty developers are kind of in that in-between position between administrators and faculty. Librarians have also been described as being in that kind of in-between position as well. So Simmons, for example, described librarians as disciplinary discourse mediators, noting that librarians are simultaneously insiders and outsiders of the classroom and of the disciplines. And so we've had to play that mediating role, for example, between students and faculty. Right, we help to translate the expectations that faculty have into language that students can understand. We help translate the bottlenecks that students are experiencing and make sure that faculty are aware of those. So we also have that sort of in-between role as well. So when I think about the competencies that librarians and faculty developers have, I see a lot of overlap between those two groups and a lot of things that librarians already do that I think prepares them to effectively act in the faculty developer role. So we also wanted to pause here. So now that we've had a chance to kind of think about broadly competencies that faculty developers and librarians have, we'd like to talk a little bit more specifically about the expertise that librarians have that would be appropriate for faculty development. So if you think back to the definitions of faculty development that Michael shared and sort of the goals of what faculty development is trying to do, what are some of those areas of expertise that librarians have that would be appropriate? And you can share your response here on our shared document, so you can go out and use the same shared document. So what are the topics that librarians know a lot about that would be appropriate for faculty development? What are the issues that we know a lot about that would really be appropriate for faculty development? So again, you can go out and share on the shared document. Yeah. And we'll take a second and give everyone a chance to respond there. See some folks are writing their responses in. Some of the ones that I'm seeing highlighted, OER, open access, citation styles, information literacy, scholarly communication, OERs, evaluating resources, lesson plan development, curiosity and determination, that one. Amanda and Michael, if you have any that you would like to share, please feel free.
Seeing some similar ones here, but IL, information literacy assessment, creating research assignments, instructional design. Some folks are noting, I think this appeared in Jane's as well, learning chat GPT and AI and those implications. That's something we're doing here at Ohio State too. Developing and scaffolding alternative assessments. Scholarly communication is another one that just popped up here.
These folks are still chatting information environment. Yeah, absolutely. Michael, did you have any that you wanted to add? Go ahead. And
no, I've seen just only that I've seen copyright, ethical use of information, fair use. I think that's all. We've seen that a number of times, actually. Yeah,
absolutely. So thank you all for sharing those here. And I think that you all, okay. Don't know why we have a completely black screen here. Not had that happen before. Let's try to get back to our presentation. That is very odd.
Wouldn't be fun if we didn't have the sweat, Jane.
Things have been going remarkably smoothly to this point.
I know. Michael or Amanda, do either of you have the presentation up?
I can in a moment here.
No idea. Yep. Let's see if it will. Get back into it. Hopefully we're back. Okay.
It's downloading on mine at the moment.
All right. All right, so hopefully we won't have that issue again. Apologies for that. I'm not sure what that was about, but we saw a lot of these highlighted in the responses that folks were coming in. But librarians have a lot of expertise in these areas: OERs, information literacy, copyright, intellectual property, scholarly communication practices. I don't know if anyone had added data visualization and management, but librarians have a lot of expertise in that area, digital humanities. So there are a lot of things that librarians know a lot about that would be absolutely appropriate for faculty development. I think a lot of the faculty development that librarians have done that I've read about has primarily been centered around information literacy, but there's absolutely no reason why that would have to be the case. There's so much that librarians know, so much expertise that we have that would be perfectly appropriate for faculty development in a lot of different areas. And the last thing I wanted to mention really quickly before I hand it over to Amanda is thinking a little bit more about the role of faculty development in the identity of librarians. So some of you might be familiar with some of the research around librarian teacher identities. And as you look at that literature, you'll find that teaching wasn't always considered to be a primary aspect of the librarian's role. It's really only in the last couple of decades that it's become accepted and expected that a lot of librarians would be teaching. Not that librarians weren't doing teaching earlier, but that wasn't really the primary aspect of the identity of librarians. It was really about providing access. But the research in the last few decades have shown that many librarians have really incorporated teaching into their conception of what it is that a librarian actually does. And I think it's really likely, as Michael was mentioning, that this is something that librarians can do with faculty development as well, right? Because we already do have a long history of involvement in faculty development. We've been providing workshops and leading faculty learning communities and developing courses for faculty. We may not have always thought of it as doing faculty development or used that actual term, but we've been working with faculty in a lot of different ways for a long time. And the research has shown that librarians are very capable of effectively acting as faculty developers and can derive personal and professional satisfaction from acting in that role. So I do think it's really possible that many librarians can start to integrate faculty development into their conception of the work that librarians do. Okay. And with that, I will pass that over to Amanda to talk more about developing your capacity.
Thank you, Jane. So hopefully we've piqued your interest in doing some faculty development work. I know that there was a significant number of folks attending today who either don't have experience quite yet or maybe have a little bit of experience. Or we also have colleagues who have been doing this work. So maybe you're thinking a little bit more about what some of the next steps might be to expand your faculty development offerings. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So in order to facilitate this part of the presentation, we've developed 4 stages, I guess, or phases. These aren't necessarily concrete or well-bounded, but we thought they might be useful, especially since we have folks who are across the boards in terms of their experience with faculty development. One thing that we'd like to point out is that, and I know this came up in the chat, that it can be particularly difficult to find time to do this, but reflection is definitely a critical component of developing capacity at all of these phases. And we have, we will in the next few slides share some questions that we came up with that you might find helpful for reflecting on your own experience. Next slide, please. The first stage is considering it, and this would be for folks who maybe don't have experience yet or maybe have just dabbled in doing some faculty development programming. Some of the elements of this stage for developing capacity is, again, finding that time to set aside to reflect and consider your priorities. This might seem obvious, and again, we realize that this is often difficult to do as we frequently are tasked with more work than perhaps we have time to do it in. But you'll need to give yourself time to experience, learn, reflect, create, and implement. So this might mean that you'll need to decide, perhaps in consultation with your supervisor, how you'll prioritize this kind of work with the other work that you already have. So for example, if you believe faculty development work will be a complementary solution to one-shot instruction or research consultants, as Michael said before, it can be a way to scale some of that work that you're already doing. you might need to think about how you're going to balance developing your capacity for faculty development work while still doing some of that instruction and those research consultations, and thinking about how you're going to balance that once you begin to implement as well. Are you going to scale back on the number of instruction sessions that you have in order to build up in faculty development? These are things that you should consider close to the beginning, and also think about what your institutional priorities are and how your supervisor or the overall library's leadership might react to those kinds of decisions. The second bullet point here is read widely about learning theories and pedagogy and instructional design. And again, I realize this came up in the chat. It can be really difficult to carve out time for this. But one of the things that's helpful about this is that we'll start to speak the same language that the faculty are speaking or other teaching and learning peers at our institutions, such as faculty developers in our centers for teaching and learning. So this is a good way to think about how we might leverage that librarian expertise that we bring to the table with some of these kind of transdisciplinary ways that we talk about teaching and learning at our institutions. This can also include exploring relevant professional associations. So there's the POD network, which is merely the North American Professional Association for Instructional Design. And I know Michael cited the POD network on one of his first slides there. And so this would give you an idea of how faculty developers, I keep wanting to say instructional designers or instructional consultants, faculty developers are approaching their work and some of the hot topics that they're thinking about in terms of their professional work with faculty. And then there's also ACRL, which is an international group that also thinks about scholarship of teaching and learning. And I think among the presenters here, we do all have some experience attending the conferences that each of these professional associations put on, which was a really interesting experience. And I can say the POD network, they were pretty enthusiastic to have librarians joining the conversation there. Next slide, please. A couple of questions to consider if you're in the considering phase. These are for reflection. Why are you interested in faculty development? What are the benefits for you or for instructors or for the students at your institution? How do you already incorporate learning theories or instructional design into your teaching? You're likely already doing this with one-shots that you're doing already, but thinking about how you can translate some of that into speaking to faculty differently would be an important reflection point. And what are the similarities and differences in the goals of faculty developer work and librarians? And I think Jane has given us a teaser for some of the ideas that you could expand upon with that reflection question. Next slide, please. So the next phase would be experiencing it. This would still be for folks who maybe don't have as much experience doing some faculty development work of their own. This is the time where it's important to get out there and participate in faculty development work that's happening at your institution. Oftentimes, depending on the size of your institution or the structure, this kind of programming is offered by a Center for Teaching and Learning, but there may be other units on campus, such as the Writing Center or Writing Across the Curriculum, maybe active, or if you have an Academic Skills Center, they may be active in offering some of this as well. And in terms of experiencing it, you can do this with your teaching librarian hat on, thinking about how that particular program helps you as a teacher, even in the one-shot setting, but also identifying how your faculty development colleagues are guiding faculty and improving their own teaching practices. What kinds of topics are they covering in their programming? What literature are they using to share evidence-based best practices? What kinds of activities are they embedding into their programming, and how engaged do the faculty seem in that particular program? This will give you a sense of the culture related to faculty development at your own institution, as well as what the priorities of the faculty are for developing as instructors. And you can see there's some questions below here. I've covered some of these already, but you could think about how does what you are learning in that particular program make you think differently about teaching or your role in supporting teaching? What activities seem to be effective with engaging faculty, and what kinds of questions and concerns are the faculty sharing in those sessions? Next slide, please. The next would be trying it, and we know that a significant number of folks joining us today have already at least dipped their toes into the trying it stage. if you've attended faculty development programming, it's possible that you've already started to develop some relationships with other folks who are doing this work. And they might also be interested in collaborating. So for example, Writing Across the Curriculum, as I mentioned before, has been a really valuable partner for us. They were already doing faculty development programming, and we both have similar goals of improving students' abilities to research and write. So it was a really natural collaboration for us to join in. And we just have one Writing Across the Curriculum colleague at a very large university. So he was very keen to collaborate with other experts at the institution who had similar goals as him. And that's true for a lot of our centers for teaching and learning as well. They're facing some of the same issues that libraries do in terms of resources and staffing. And so in order for them to make impact, they're often looking for partners and collaborators to expand their offerings. You can start small with a single workshop or facilitated discussion group to see how much time and effort it takes to develop and promote a program, as well as gauging interest on your campus for engaging in discussion about a particular topic. And I noticed in the chat too, some folks were saying that the type of employment appointment that they have may be a barrier to doing this kind of work. And I recognize that that's absolutely true. There were institutions where I might not have as easily done this work as I do at Ohio State. But you can also try some grassroots ways of doing this work and maybe reaching out to faculty that you know you already have an established relationship to do some book groups or some reading some articles on a monthly basis and discussing those. Sometimes that's less intimidating for faculty because everybody's coming together as a community. And sometimes it can be easier for us to break down some of those barriers that our different types of appointments might present. I'll also say reaching out to other librarians who are doing this work for feedback or suggestions. I know Jane receives those kinds of questions frequently, and she loves to talk about the work that she's doing and share resources and ideas. So if you know of other librarians doing this work, that's another great way to get started. Next slide, please. And we have some reflection questions here. I'm not going to go through all of these for the essence of time, but you do have access to the slides, so you can come back to some of these after the presentation. And next slide, please. Embracing it. And so some of us are at this stage where we've gone all in on our faculty development programming, and we don't have specialized reflection questions here because really reflection encompasses the entire embracing it stage. So collecting and analyzing data that will help you to assess the effectiveness of existing programming, reflecting on what that means for how you should move forward and whether or not the way you're using resources is appropriate and giving you a return on investment. Determining if a more programmatic approach is appropriate. So sometimes we have ad hoc approaches that work really well at the trying it stage, but maybe it's time for us to start putting things together as an official program of sorts that the libraries can offer either on their own or in collaboration. And consider doing some strategic planning and including creating goals for the year, identifying necessary resources, especially if you don't already have them and you might need to make some asks, and planning for assessment. And I can say Jane is excellent at doing this work. She does this pretty much every year. And I know that this work in particular has contributed to the success that she's seen at Ohio State. I think that wraps it up for me, and I'm going to hand it back to Jane.
Thank you. So yeah, in the interest of time, we'll open it up for questions now, or if you have any key takeaways that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear those as well. You can just go ahead. We're going to use this on the shared document. We'll just do this on the chat instead. So we'll open it up for questions now.
And people are putting stuff in the chat. I just want to put one wrap up thing in here from the ACRL ULS Professional Development Committee. There is a quick presentation evaluation in the chat. Please fill it out before you go. We'd like to thank everyone in ACRL's office, including our moderators here today. And without them, we couldn't do this. Remember that we will send the link to the recording and other supplemental documents for this session. And that's it. Sorry, you can start answering the questions.
So I think that's, Michael, do you want me to read those, or you guys wanted to take that yourselves?
I just found one I'd liked, so.
Okay, well, why don't you start with that one then, since I was just going to go in order of when they showed up.
Okay, sorry. Jennifer Stubbs asked, any guide on how to collaborate with the Office of Institutional Effectiveness to use existing data instead of yet another survey to speak to administrators? That spoke to me because my number of my research articles in the area dealt with existing data collection efforts. And I think this is so important because it's much, much easier to jump on the coattails of existing data collection efforts than to create your own. And I found that to be, that's how I was able to get data from 3,000 students. That would have been impossible for me to administer otherwise. There was a blanket IRB that I was thankfully basically invited to participate in, and that streamlined a lot of the processes, and basically getting a few questions on an already existing and known survey versus creating your own makes a gigantic difference. So I think that's a great question. I don't have any specific advice to offer because it's going to vary depending on the situation, but I think that's a really viable strategy.
Thank you, Michael. I noticed a question as well that I thought was really interesting. So Gary had asked, have you noticed trends at OSU in faculty disengagement through the pandemic with faculty development offerings? That's a great question. And I think I have kind of an answer in two different directions. On the one hand, one of the faculty development offerings that I facilitate was started during the pandemic in response to the pandemic as an information literacy virtual workshop series. And that has actually only grown since it started to the point where I tend to have sometimes registrations more than 100 and generally, attendance about half that, but I get good attendance. So that has actually grown through the pandemic, and that those are 1 hour virtual workshops that I do on a pretty regular schedule. I change the topics up every time that I offer workshops. So I do a lot of different kinds of topics that I really try to keep it engaging and practical for faculty. So that series has actually grown. On the other hand, one of the offerings that we do, meaningful inquiry, which Amanda mentioned, we have seen some disengagement over time with that one. And we did end up kind of offering it a little bit less over the past couple of years as we've seen the number of folks who have engaged go down. So I think that one of my response for that would be to think about what energy faculty can put into faculty development sort of at that time. And, maybe meaningful inquiry is a 3-day, it's a commitment. And so faculty may not have the energy to commit to that, whereas they can commit to a 1 hour virtual workshop that they can watch during their lunch. So that would be my response to that. Amanda, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that one as well.
Same. And we did a collaborative educator survey at Ohio State. Ironically, we had really poor response rates this year as compared to before the pandemic. And educators, and again, this includes teaching assistants, associated faculty, tenure track faculty in general, were interested in shorter engagements that were offered virtually. And they were less interested in anything that was like more than an hour, and anything that was meeting in person. There has been some success with return to in-person day conferences at Ohio State. We don't get into that, but there are some trends that kind of at Ohio State level that go beyond just the library's offerings.
I saw some folks were asking for books. I started to put a few book recommendations in the chat for folks. Someone asked if I would share the information literacy 6-week module. Yes, so if you wanted to go ahead and email me, Hammonds.73, I can share with you the outline of the information literacy course that's for faculty. And yeah, unfortunately, since it's in Canvas, you won't actually be able to see the course, but I can share you all the module information and outline and everything for that. Other questions? There ones that we have missed?
There are, but I'm betting Sam's going to kick us off, Jean.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we have 1 minute, and it's it's a time thing. It's not me. So if you want to answer one more question before maybe we get cut off, I see people are heading out to their next meeting, which I totally get, but I'm going to drop the evaluation link one more time, and then thank you all.
Thank you. I think that one question, somebody is developing a workshop for assignment design. Do you have any advice to offer her?
I would say Jane put her email address into the chat. I'll put mine in as well. We do a lot of that. So just reach out to us and we can definitely share materials that we've developed related to that topic.
You're getting a lot of praise. So I think that's probably a good time to end because my clock right just hit 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Central time. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to all of our presenters, Amanda, Michael, Jane. This was great. And remember, you will get a link to the recording, the slides, and the presentation evaluation again in an email in the next couple days, weeks from ACRL. Thank you all. Bye, everyone.